believe that's Trey Benson, right? It is indeed Trey Benson of the Cardinals.
So Benson is he's another interesting one um, because let's see, last year. Oh wait, he's a rookie this year.
Rookie,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Um, he's getting a lot of hype right now from a fantasy perspective, which I can see why. I have him ranked a little bit higher because I really do feel like if he has a really good training camp, and he does really well here in the preseason, and depending on where Connor sits, I could definitely see the Cardinals going to a 50-50 split with these guys. Connor's getting up there in age. Um, what I think Connor's how old is Connor now? I think Connor is
He's pushing like 29, 30.
he's 29. He's getting up there in age. Last year, Connor, what did Connor do last year? Last year, Connor missed 4 games. Last year, yeah, he had over 1,000 yards. He wasn't, he was had 27 receptions. Really not a lot of yardage though. He did have 12 touchdowns, 7 of them rushing. But given that he's 29, he's had issues with injuries. I really do think Benson is going to be splitting with him. And if Benson shows that he's more effective than Connor at the beginning of the year, I could see him taking over as the lead running back, and I could see them reducing Connor's role to keep him healthy and using him more as a red zone type of guy um, in Arizona.
I totally agree with you, and he is a rookie going into this season. I want to apologize right now. I have Dermancado as his pitcher on there. I'm gonna get that changed here in a second, but um, yeah, you look at the depth chart and Dermancado, I don't really have any faith in personally. I think if anything, Michael Carter would give Benson a run at the backup role right away at the start of the year. I actually think Carter is a pretty good running back. Barely missed a cut here for me, but
Yeah, the one thing, and I know we've been talking about doing a rookie podcast. The one thing I don't remember is where Arizona actually drafted him. But I believe they drafted him, in the mid rounds. So
66 overall.
yeah, okay, so he was drafted I think in the top of the third round. So if you're drafting a running back in the third round, trust me, you're gonna be, um, you've got a plan around that running back. So I really am buying into the hype with him because I think he, just like I said about the Giants rookie running back, he fell into a really good situation. And I do think that he's going to be out on the field quite a bit. Um, uh, with Arizona, and the other thing I'll say is Florida State has a history of producing outstanding running backs in the NFL. So given that he was with Florida State as well, I think that you know he's got a really good chance, a huge upside. Um, like I said, I would draft him. I definitely see him as a bench guy, and based on where he falls on the depth chart after the preseason, I think it depends on whether you can look at him as a potential flex or not. But he's definitely warranted for a bench.
And it doesn't hurt to have a rookie on your bench because then that way you can at least have a backup option. Like I always like picking up like the younger guys in case someone like, especially like James Conner, who does get hurt. He actually hasn't had a full season where he wasn't hurt. He's always missed at least one game. Actually, he's only had one season where he hasn't missed more than 3 games. So there's some upside potential there, and if he just keeps getting hurt, you never know. You could just straight up see them make the switch over to him. And honestly, I wouldn't hate that because I think Connor's ran his course, and he's not, you know, the
Right.
top 5 guy that he used to be, or for the season that he was top 5. All right, we got that pitcher fixed as well. Do apologize for that, but Marshawn Lloyd of the Packers, rookie.
Yeah, so Marshawn Lloyd's another guy that's been getting a little bit of hype from a rookie perspective. They actually, a lot of people actually think that he's going to be the number 2 guy behind Josh Jacobs. Um, I'm not sold that he's going to be the number 2 guy. I know Lloyd is dealing with a little bit of an injury and stuff. I don't think it's anything serious. But I think it's going to be a battle between him and AJ Dillon. Um, but again, I think that he has a lot of upside. Um, and I don't get me wrong, I love Josh Jacobs and stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Packers try to do something similar, like what they did with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon and stuff in regards to using 2 backs on a regular basis in their offense. So that's why I had him ranked a little bit higher. Um, but again, I had him ranked there because of his upside. I think it's all gonna depend on where he shakes out in training camp and how he overcomes the injury that he's dealing with. I don't think it's serious, but obviously, whenever somebody's hurt, you got to keep an eye on it. So
Yeah, and I know the Packers like to use multiple running backs they have every year. Even with Aaron Jones, like I don't think Josh Jacobs is gonna, have the production he thinks he's gonna have in Green Bay. They are gonna lean on a second running back. I do think Lloyd will take that over from Dillon. Dillon's just kind of been inconsistent throughout his career and hasn't really like had any major years outside of like his second year in the league. But even then, it was
a lot of that was driven on Aaron Jones'
yeah.
availability, though, as well, because Jones has always kind of had a history of injuries. So
So and Josh Jacobs really doesn't get hurt, so it's something where I'd feel comfortable putting him top like 50, top 60 for sure. I wouldn't draft him just because I know Jacobs will be that go-to guy, and he's probably going to be the red zone guy. And at the end of the day, touchdowns are touchdowns in fantasy football. So, um, I would lean away from him, but it wouldn't hurt to have him on your bench, especially if you like carrying like 5 or 6 different running backs. It's always an option. And if Josh Jacobs were to get hurt, you'd be the guy with him on your bench, and they'd probably lean on him over Dillon. To move forward there from Lloyd, Roschon Johnson.
wow, we had him ranked the same. Fascinating. Um, you know what? I was a huge fan of Roschon Johnson last year. Uh, yeah, he only had 352 yards on 81 carries. Um, he played in 15 games. So I don't remember if he maybe wasn't active for a couple of those
He got
games.
hurt for a game.
And so, but he also had 34 receptions and over 200 yards in the receiving game. He only had 2 touchdowns. The thing I like about Johnson, and this is why I think he has a really good chance of leaping Herbert, is he averaged 4.25 yards a carry. That's pretty good for a running back, as you all know. I think that he can be really explosive, and I think I really do think that he's gonna leapfrog Herbert and be the number 2 guy. and I definitely think he's going to have an active role in the offense this year. And if anything happens with Swift, I think that's going to increase his value. I believe Johnson's got a lot of upside. He's a young guy, only 23. This is obviously only his second year. And I think the Bears do really, really like him.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I'd give him a slight edge. I thought I had him and Herbert one apart from each other. Turns out I had him a little bit higher than I expected, but yeah, I think he's got that slight edge there on Herbert, and I think he was just hurt for a game there because I think he went in and got hurt with. Like, it was like one of those games where like two or three of their running backs got hurt in the same game. It was like a weird game to watch, but
I'll be honest, I was really surprised that they went after Swift because I do like the Bears running backs. And even with the Devontae Foreman, I didn't think the Bears needed to go out and get Swift. I think the reason the Bears did it, and Ryan Poles, their GM, had admitted it. They drafted Caleb Williams, and they let Fields go. And Poles was the first one to say we didn't surround Fields with enough weapons, and so I think Swift was the subject of part of their plan to bring in multiple weapons on that Chicago offense to ensure that Williams had everything he needed to be successful. Because I personally believe they failed Fields. So,
oh, they definitely did. And honestly, I think they could have gone without Swift. They probably would have been fine just with Herbert and Johnson as their running backs, and they have Travis Homer who has had moments in the past of being decent. So like, I don't think they necessarily needed Swift, and I think if Swift does get hurt at any point, Johnson will step up big. And then I think like him and Herbert will probably split a decent chunk of reps, but I think Johnson's gonna be productive in the realm of if Swift gets hurt, and even if Swift doesn't get hurt, I think he's still gonna have a somewhat productive year, and I would be happy with drafting him and having him on my bench, filling in on a possible bye week if needed. He would never be my flex. He'd just kind of be a fill in when I
yeah,
have a bye player.
the only way I think that he would be a starter is if something happened to Swift and Johnson was declared the guy and he was
Yeah.
getting the reps. Then at that point, I think you definitely could look at um, swapping them in. Somebody that ends up drafting Swift, it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe look at Johnson later in later rounds as just a bench player in case something happens to Swift, so that you can plug him in
Yeah.
if Swift goes down with an injury.
Honestly, this was the Bears signing Swift was kind of a shock to me. I actually had a feeling at one point that they were maybe going to go after Dalvin Cook and try to get a cheaper veteran, but um, it's not bad. I just kind of wish they would have let Johnson get a shot. Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, so Hubbard, I think that, well, first of all, Jonathan Brooks, um, the rookie, was drafted really high by Carolina. I just I don't think you're that Carolina is not going to use Jonathan Brooks. I think Jonathan Brooks, unless he does something significantly terrible in training camp, is going to be the guy. Now, with that being said, Carolina is one of those teams again. Now I know they got a different coaching staff and stuff, but Hubbard, when Foreman was there, Hubbard and Foreman split a lot. You know, I think Hubbard has proven himself to be efficient. I mean, last year he had 902 yards, on 200 and what was that,
38.
238 carries. He had 37 catches for 253 yards. He only had 5 touchdowns. I do see Hubbard's production going down this year just because I think that that Brooks is going to have him definitely have an active role in there. You do have Miles Sanders and Rashad Penny there that they also have on their depth. I don't see any of those guys jumping up over Hubbard or Brooks unless there's injuries involved. So I had Hubbard a little bit lower because I really, Jonathan Brooks has probably been the most hyped rookie this year from a running back perspective, and I really do think that um, the Panthers have every intention on giving him the ball and seeing what he can do with it. So unless he stumbles and he doesn't have a great training camp, or he stumbles at the beginning of the year and maybe, you know, doesn't secure the ball or something like that, I just don't see Hubbard's production being like it was last year. I definitely see him as a bench guy. And based on where the beginning of the year goes and how Carolina uses him, I don't see him as a flex right now, um, unless Carolina, uses him differently than we think. But I do see him as a definite bench guy.
Yeah, Hubbard for me was actually a tough one to like fully put on the board because I could totally see him where I ranked him sitting at 42, being like relief there to Brooks, but I also could see him being out of the top 60. I could see Sanders and Penny being a bit annoying and getting their hands in the mix too, but um, I stood by my gut, and my gut was telling me he's going to be sitting here, which for me is hard because like I get connected to certain players in fantasy football. And Miles Sanders was one of those guys, but Sanders didn't do anything last year, and he was coming off a solid year there in Philadelphia, and just could not get it done in Carolina. So I just kind of lost a little faith there. And don't get me wrong, he could come out and overtake Hubbard, or they could be splitting those backup reps, but that backfield's kind of hard for me to judge because we need to see a Carolina offense that can produce this year. We need Bryce Young to go off with Deontay and Thielen and tear it up a little bit for us to get a full like judgment on this offense. For me personally, I wouldn't draft a single Panther running back because I just don't know what I'm going to get out of them. Moving on, Rico Dowdle. Dowdle?
That's what it is. So Rico, I just want to say suave. So Rico, he's on right now. He's listed behind Elliott on the Cowboys depth chart. And if you watched any of our videos, you know how I feel about the Cowboys. But here's what I'll say about Rico. I think that he's been in the league for 4 years. Uh, with with Dallas. Um, his rookie year, he played 15 games. He didn't play a single game in 2021. I believe he was hurt. I don't remember what the injury was. He only played 5 games in 2022. Last year he was in 16. If Rico can be consistently out on the field, I think he's going to be splitting with Elliott. I just think Elliott's lost a step. I don't think the Cowboys' offensive line is going to be as good as they have been in years past. I think they're going to have to rely on some younger legs, given the fact that 2 of his 4 years he hadn't really played a lot. I think he's going to have fresher legs than Elliott. It wouldn't surprise me if he does stay out on the field and he's being productive that he leapfrogs Elliott if Elliott has any struggles. I think Elliott was kind of a stretch signing for the Cowboys. And I think the reason they signed him was because they really didn't have a lot of money to spend in this offseason. As um, people may or may not know with the Cowboys, they didn't do much in free agency. I think it was a real easy signing for them to bring him back because he wasn't gone that long from them and stuff. So, but I think Rico has the ability to leapfrog Elliott. Um, Me personally, I don't draft Cowboys because they don't like me. So I would never draft him. But putting my personal feelings aside, I can definitely see him as a bench player. And I could see him, depending on where the training camp goes and where if he leapfrogs Elliott, as a potential flex option. I don't think he's a starter. I think a flex option's a stretch right now, given depending on what we see from Elliott and him, at the beginning of the year. So to me, at the beginning of the season, he's probably a bench player at best, and potentially you could plug him in if Elliott gets hurt.
Yeah, and to me, he's a bench player at best as well. Like any of these guys outside of the top 30 are really more so bench players in my eyes. For Dowdle, I'd put him at the 52 spot like I have on screen for you guys, and that's just because I think Elliott's going to bounce back this year and have a pretty solid year. So I wouldn't draft Dowdle because I'd be going after Elliott, but that's just me, and that's all I can really say outside of the fact that Dowdle did have a decent year with the carries he got. I think he could have had more. Pollard was not what the Cowboys were expecting, and I think they should have gave Dowdle the ball a little bit more so they could have thought for the future because I